He used to hold her face like it was the only thing that made sense in a noisy world. Now he stood across from her with a legal envelope and told her she didn't live here anymore. Before it all fell apart, the mornings had rhythm. Calla Vienne moved through the kitchen with practiced grace. The counter was clean, her coffee ritual quiet, the cinnamon she added to the grounds more about memory than taste. She wore a soft grey cardigan over navy linen, tied her hair low, and opened the sliding door to let in the November breeze. The house sat in the hills, just outside Oakland, designed by Riven's architects, but softened by Calla's touches. She never liked cold spaces, even when they were expensive. The smell of cinnamon drifted as the gate opened. She didn't rush. She didn't brace. He had been distant lately, yes, but she still thought the man she married would, at minimum, meet her eyes. Instead, he walked in, silent, holding nothing but a thick envelope. "Morning," she said softly, still holding her coffee. He didn't respond, just placed the envelope on the marble counter. When he finally looked at her, there was no love. No apology, only finality. "It's done," he said. Calla blinked. Her fingers curled around the mug. "What is?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost too quiet. He nodded at the envelope. "Divorce. My attorney sent it over. I signed." The room didn't move, but something in her chest did. She glanced at the envelope. Neat print, her name at the top, his name under it. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. "Divorce," she repeated, not as a question, just to feel the word. Still no apology. Still no reason. And then, outside, a voice called out, "Riv, are you coming?" A woman's voice. Sweet. Too casual. Calla didn't move. Riven let out a long, exhausted breath. "She's moving in," he said. "Today." She looked up. He continued, "I transferred the house to her last week. It's hers now." For the first time, Calla's face shifted, just a little. "You're serious?" He nodded. "It's cleaner this way. Cleaner." He said it like he was talking about taxes or dusting furniture. Calla turned slightly, placing the coffee down before it could slip from her grip. She looked around the kitchen, the blue ceramic bowl she brought from her mother's place, the small plant she'd kept alive for 5 years, the photo by the fridge of their road trip to Montana. She wasn't sentimental, but she was deliberate. She'd built this home with intention, not for grandeur, but for warmth. And now it belonged to a woman who hadn't lived a single memory inside it. "I see," she whispered. Riven shifted. Maybe he expected her to yell. Maybe he thought she'd cry. But she didn't. She looked back at him and said, "Leave the keys." He frowned. "What?" "You won't need them. And I won't be here when she walks in." "Calla." She cut him off. It was never about the house. Riven left without another word. She didn't watch him go. She didn't ask the woman's name. She didn't want to know how long it had been going on. There was no closure coming, and she wasn't about to beg for it. She stood in the silence of the kitchen for 5 more minutes. Then she poured out the coffee. She opened her laptop. She searched for temporary leases in downtown Oakland. She found a furnished studio available the next day. Street-facing, small bathroom, close to everything but tucked away from everyone. She booked it. She texted the moving company that had helped them 2 years ago and asked for a truck. She didn't tell anyone why, and by noon, she was packing. No loud music, no dramatic boxes piled high, just a quiet, methodical removal of herself from every room. She didn't touch the photos. She didn't need to. They didn't belong to her anymore. Calla was not the type to chase people. She never had been. She was the woman who waited in the background and made spaces better just by existing in them. She didn't over-explain. She didn't decorate to impress. She believed in silent kindness, thoughtful presence, and letting people show who they really were without forcing the truth out. That's what made Riven fall in love with her all those years ago. At that non-profit gala in Oakland, she hadn't even recognized his name on the donor list. He liked that. She was more interested in whether the folding chairs were aligned and the microphone worked than in who wrote the biggest check. They had tacos from a food truck after that night. She wore sneakers. He wore a half-unbuttoned dress shirt and laughed like someone who hadn't laughed in years. They married 9 months later. No press, no guests, just vows written on notepads in a cabin upstate. She remembered his words clearly. We won't forget what matters. But he had. Somewhere between private jets and Forbes interviews, Riven had decided that the quiet woman, who made his world stable, no longer fit the version of himself he wanted to showcase. He traded her calm for chaos, stability for excitement, depth for show. Calla wasn't shocked. She had felt the shift long before the envelope. He started cancelling dinners, ignoring weekend plans, coming home late. Once, he smelled like a perfume she didn't wear. She never confronted him. She simply watched. The silence between them grew like fog until even speaking felt performative. And now, he was gone, and she refused to be broken. The next morning, she moved into the studio. It had creaky floors and a faulty cabinet hinge, but it had a view of the street, and the kind of noises that reminded her she wasn't stuck in a museum of memories. She unpacked slowly. 2 suitcases, a lamp, a few books, nothing decorative. She made tea and sat by the window that night, watching people live below. And for the first time in 6 years, she thought, I don't have to answer to anyone. She didn't cry that night. Not yet. But she slept with the window cracked and let the city sounds replace the echo of an empty mansion. Would you stay calm if your partner handed you divorce papers in your own kitchen? Have you ever felt betrayed so quietly that it didn't even feel real at first? This story speaks to anyone who's ever been replaced without explanation. If you've ever chosen silence over revenge, share your story in the comments. Let someone know they're not alone. The city didn't sleep. Neither did Calla. She kept the lights low, sat on the floor with her back against the small couch. No TV, no music, just the faint sirens and the sound of someone arguing 2 streets over. It didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like detachment, the kind you feel after walking out of a movie where you knew how it would end, but you watched anyway. The studio apartment didn't have much space, but it didn't need to. There was no one to impress, no legacy to maintain, no furniture chosen for resale value, just a woman and her thoughts. She opened the divorce envelope again, not to read, but to remind herself it had really happened. Her name was typed in clean, sharp font. The woman who had once been his person was now just a legal formality to be separated. She put it away. She didn't need proof. The next week moved in strange time. Fast in hours, slow in emotions. She worked remotely from her laptop, took long walks during the day, ate toast and almond butter at noon, never wore makeup, didn't check the news, but the whispers found her anyway. Someone texted her, I didn't want to believe the rumors. I'm so sorry. Another said, I saw him in SF with her last month. I thought it was work. She never replied. People wanted drama. They wanted her to leak screenshots, share bitterness, go public. But Calla didn't owe them a performance. She owed herself peace. And peace doesn't beg to be seen. She went to the grocery store in joggers, said thank you softly to strangers, let people cut her off in traffic without honking. What hurt more than betrayal was knowing she was so replaceable. She hadn't just been left. She had been erased. And yet, she wasn't angry. Not yet. Her name was Naraya. Calla had heard it before, once or twice at events. She was younger, flashier, brilliant in her own way. A brand strategist who climbed fast, knew how to control a room, and always wore high heels that echoed too loudly on marble floors. She was everything Calla wasn't trying to be. The world loved her for it. Articles popped up within days. Billionaire Riven Dawn, seen with new strategic partner, Naraya Kess. Tech mogul's new power couple takeover begins. From private equity to passion, inside the rise of Dawn and Kess. Calla never opened them. She just saw the headlines, and sometimes people messaged her like she was expected to care loudly, but she didn't need to perform her pain. She was living it quietly, honestly, and dignity, she decided, would be her only response. She didn't take everything when she left the house. Some items were just too tied to a life that no longer fit her. The blue vase from her mother's estate, the silk robe she wore the first night they moved in, the travel journals with half-written plans for cities they never visited. She didn't want them anymore. She only brought what made her feel like herself, not the wife, not the partner, just Calla, her books, her diffuser, her comfort hoodie, a stack of old letters from her college best friend who lived in Boston, and her coffee maker, because healing required caffeine and routine. It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the humiliation. It was the lack of hesitation, the way he walked in and handed her that envelope like it was a project deadline, the way he said, "She's moving in," with no flicker of guilt, the way he transferred the house without telling her, as if it was simply a matter of property rights. That was what broke her. Not that he left, but how effortlessly he did, as if she was never sacred, as if the vows were just filler, as if 6 years were something he could fold up and mail away. She drafted a message one night. To Riven, "You could have at least waited until I left before moving her in. You could have given me a week, a day, 1 hour, something human." She stared at the screen, then deleted it. He wouldn't care, and even if he did, it wouldn't change anything, because men like Riven didn't respond to pain. They responded to power. And she wasn't interested in playing his game. She found work again in a wellness clinic a few blocks from her studio. The clinic director had remembered her from years ago when Calla helped with a retreat event. He said, "We could use someone who's efficient but calming." She smiled faintly. "I can do that." It wasn't glamorous. She managed schedules, budget sheets, team coordination. But she liked the way patients greeted her at the front desk, the way her co-workers asked about her day without digging for gossip. One afternoon, while logging inventory, she looked around and realized she didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel discarded. She just felt steady. It wasn't happiness, but it was ground, and ground was enough for now. 2 weeks into the clinic job, she was asked to join a property development project on the side. A friend of a friend needed someone who understood people and process. Someone organized. The CEO of the firm was Kyle Rinn. She hadn't met him yet, but her contact said, "He's not the type to care about resumes. Just show up. Be yourself." She showed up the next day in soft slacks and a clean blouse. No power pose, no intention to impress. She walked into the meeting room with a folder, a black pen, and her quiet presence. Kyle looked up from his laptop. He didn't smile. He just said, "You're here early." And she replied, "I always am." That night, Calla walked home through the late dusk. Her phone buzzed with a notification from a gossip blog, but she ignored it. She had no interest in the spectacle of her ex-husband's new life. She stepped into her studio. The air smelled like lavender and paper. She sat at the small desk by the window, and for the first time since the envelope, she wrote something for herself. Today felt normal. I didn't miss him. I didn't remember the house. I was just me. Calla didn't tell anyone she had left. Not her older sister in Los Angeles. Not her former assistant who still sent her birthday texts. Not the 2 women from the book club she'd once hosted in her old living room. She packed and moved without ceremony, because announcing it would have meant making it real. It already was. The studio smelled like paint and city air. No one asked if she was okay. No one knew to ask. She kept her phone on silent most of the day. The only number that called was from the moving company. The driver dropped off her few boxes and didn't look her in the eye. She tipped him well anyway. That first week felt like time had stretched its arms too far. Everything she did felt slow. Making tea, folding towels, writing grocery lists, even brushing her hair. The silence didn't ache like she expected. It just echoed. There was no bitterness in her, not yet. Bitterness required confrontation. She hadn't confronted anything. She'd simply left. It didn't feel like losing him. It felt like being released from something she never knew had been suffocating her. On the second night, she sat by the window with a blanket draped over her shoulders, watching people walk their dogs, carry groceries, head into buildings. No one noticed her. No one needed to. That anonymity gave her something she hadn't realized she missed: the freedom to be nobody. Her old life had layers. Expectations, etiquette, a certain posture, a way to speak at charity events, how to smile for Riven's colleagues, how to give him the space he needed without ever appearing needy. For 6 years, she was a version of herself that supported his identity. In her mind, that was love, partnership. But now, sitting cross-legged on the floor with soup warming on a single burner stove, she understood something else. What she had offered was stability. What he had wanted, apparently, was attention. She got the full picture that Friday, scrolling through her tablet. A headline stood out: Dawn and Kess, Silicon Valley's new power duo. The photo said everything. Naraya in red, her hand lightly on Riven's chest. Riven in tailored navy, his smile wide but tight, like a man keeping up an image that didn't quite belong to him. The article called Naraya a visionary brand strategist and said she had reimagined the visual narrative of Dawn Capital in under 3 months. Kala didn't finish the article. She simply placed the tablet face down on the couch and stared at the wall. She didn't hate Naraya. Women like her had always existed. Loud, sharp, magnetic, the kind of women people didn't forget. Kala was not forgettable. She was optional. She took a deep breath. It wasn't a breakdown. Not yet. Just a quiet moment of knowing. That weekend, she walked into a downtown bookstore and bought herself a journal. Not for processing pain, not for cataloging her thoughts, just to start over. Page 1, I exist, I matter. Even if no one claps. It was the only sentence she wrote. On Sunday, she took a longer walk and found a small cafe with real plants and mismatched chairs. She sat by the window, ordered peppermint tea, and watched couples come and go. At the table beside hers, a man and woman were arguing. Quietly, but with that controlled tone that said the wounds were deep. The man checked his phone 3 times in 5 minutes. The woman blinked hard and stirred her drink without sipping. Kala noticed a thin line of eyeliner running beneath the woman's eye. The man stood up, walked out, didn't look back. The woman stayed seated, motionless for a while, then finally reached into her bag, pulled out cash, and placed it gently on the table. Kala looked down at her tea, unsure why the moment hit her. Maybe it was because heartbreak had a rhythm, and everyone danced to it alone. Later that night, she sat with her journal again. Page 2, some people never look back. Maybe that's the mercy. She went to bed with that thought. Monday morning came without resistance. She made toast, checked her email. A note came in from an old client, someone who remembered her from an event she once coordinated. He asked if she'd be open to consulting again. Said he had a small team working on a wellness project downtown. She typed, yes. The meeting was set for Wednesday. She didn't tell anyone. She wore black slacks, a clean white blouse, and simple flats. No rings, no jewelry, her hair in a low twist. The man waiting for her was kind, polite. He didn't bring up Riven. He didn't mention tabloids. He spoke like she was capable, like her name still held weight. The offer was simple, project-based, flexible hours, coordination and structure, her strength. She accepted. When she walked home that day, something shifted. She wasn't starting over. She was continuing. That night, she stood at the kitchen counter, eating leftover soup from the pot, and smiled to herself. She hadn't spoken to Riven since the envelope. And she wouldn't. She hadn't posted on social media. She hadn't replied to old friends who texted after seeing headlines. She didn't owe anyone a narrative. Kala Vienne wasn't building a comeback. She was just breathing easier. She climbed into bed, set her alarm, and pulled the blanket up. Peace, she realized, wasn't loud. It was this, just this. Kael Rin wasn't the type of man who filled a room. He didn't command it with volume or presence. He simply existed with a kind of stillness that made people take him seriously before he even said a word. When Kala first walked into the office space for their second meeting, she expected a noisy startup vibe. Instead, she found quiet lighting, clean desks, and an atmosphere that felt more like restoration than rush. Kyle looked up from a blueprint, nodded once, and said, "Thanks for being early." Kala sat across from him and handed over the documents she'd prepared. Site development updates, zoning timelines. She didn't try to explain them aloud unless asked. She respected silence the way she respected timing. Both mattered. Kyle skimmed the pages, tapping his thumb against the side in rhythm. "You were in project management before?" he asked. "Yes," she answered. "Mostly private events and operational coordination. No gaps in your process," he noted, flipping a page. "That's rare." Kala nodded once, unsure if that was a compliment or a concern. Kyle closed the folder. "Do you want to keep doing this long term?" he asked. She didn't rush the answer. "I want to do something that doesn't waste people's time." He studied her for a moment, as if measuring that statement. Then he said, "That's more than enough for now." She left the meeting with a signed contract for 6 months of consulting work. That night, she let herself exhale a little deeper than usual. Not because of the money, but because she had been hired for her mind, not her last name, not her status, not her ties to anyone else. Her own work, her own reputation, still intact. She cooked dinner that night for the first time in weeks. Brown rice, roasted squash, a lemon vinaigrette she hadn't made since their first year of marriage. It didn't remind her of him. It reminded her of herself. She ate slowly, barefoot, jazz playing low on her speaker. Later, she stood by the window, journal in hand. She didn't write anything. She just held it. The headlines didn't stop. Riven and Naraya were being hailed as a marketing renaissance. Every week, a new photo, a new caption, a new quote from a boardroom or cocktail hour. The media called them magnetic. Kala didn't read the stories, but the images floated around the internet like confetti, messy, meaningless, impossible to avoid. A friend she hadn't heard from in over a year messaged her. "You okay? I saw the news. I'm so sorry." She typed back, "I'm okay, thank you," then deleted it. She never responded. There was no comfort in being remembered only when your life became gossip. At work, Kyle rarely spoke in meetings unless he had something meaningful to add. He preferred facts over flair. He wrote on actual notepads, and he thanked people properly, not with throwaway phrases, but with real attention. Once, after a late presentation, he walked past her desk, paused and said, "I know this week's been heavier than most. You've been sharp. Don't think I missed that." She didn't respond with flattery, just a nod. She was used to being overlooked when men had bigger things on their mind. Kyle didn't overlook her. He didn't invade either. He left space for her to bring herself into the room. And that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. It took 4 weeks before she told anyone what had happened with Riven. And when she did, it was to a woman she barely knew. Her name was Briar, an administrative assistant at the clinic she'd worked at briefly. They met for coffee after running into each other on the street. Briar had a softness to her voice that made you feel like you weren't wasting time by talking. They sat on a bench near the park, leaves crunching underfoot. Kala spoke carefully, skipping the details. No names, no drama, just facts. She said, "He left for someone else, gave her the house." Briar didn't gasp, didn't ask for more. She simply said, "You look steadier than most would." Kala smiled faintly. "That's the thing, it didn't wreck me, it just cleared the air." They sipped their coffees quietly for a while. Then Briar added, "Sometimes the slow griefs are the ones that don't make noise. Doesn't mean they don't hurt." That stuck with her. She wrote it down later. Slow griefs don't make noise. It explained everything she couldn't. Kyle asked her one day if she was open to joining a site visit out in Monterey. "Only if it doesn't eat up your entire Saturday," he said. She considered it. A month ago, she wouldn't have said yes to anything that involved long drives and shared space with someone new. But now, she said, "Send me the time and location. I'll be there." They didn't ride together. They met at the site, an old vineyard property being converted into an eco-retreat. Kyle showed her the plans, but mostly let her observe. He wasn't looking to impress. He was watching for insight. They sat on the edge of a retaining wall at one point, both eating from boxed lunches brought by the contractor. He asked, "Do you prefer the city or open air?" She answered, "The city. But only because it doesn't expect me to be inspired by it." He nodded like he understood, then said, "I prefer quiet places. They keep me from performing." She tilted her head. "Do you perform often?" He paused. "I used to. For people who stopped clapping the moment I got quiet." She looked at him then, fully, and felt something shift. He wasn't trying to charm her. He was just being true. They drove back separately. No contact that night. No hints. No overreach. But the next morning, there was a fresh container of peppermint tea on her desk, with a sticky note that said, "Saw this. Thought of the cafe you mentioned." He signed it with just the letter K. Calla touched the note, read it twice, slid it into her bag. She didn't know what it meant, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't flinch at the thought of being known again. She stood at the center of the living room in her studio apartment, holding a photo she hadn't meant to pack. It was small, barely framed, tucked between a stack of paperwork from their second year of marriage. The image was of them, Riven and her, seated in front of a stone fireplace somewhere in Oregon. He was smiling. She was leaning into his shoulder, face half turned toward him like she was listening, not posing. She remembered that trip. It had rained. They'd stayed inside for most of it. No itinerary. No pressure. They made eggs at 11 a.m., took slow walks in wet woods, played cards on the floor. It had felt like the kind of life they could live forever. But maybe she had misread that too. Calla stared at the photo, then dropped it into the trash. Not to hurt herself. To stop pretending. The truth was, she had felt the shift in him long before he walked in with the divorce papers. It didn't start with a name or a kiss or another woman's perfume. It started with silence, with long stretches of quiet across the dinner table, with eyes that stopped landing on her, with weekend trips for work that felt more like escape than strategy. At first, she told herself he was tired. Then she told herself he was overwhelmed. Then she told herself nothing, because the story had become too hard to justify even to herself. When she asked if he was okay, he said, "I'm just focused right now." When she asked if they were okay, he said, "We're fine. Don't read into things." But reading between the lines had always been her gift. That's how she knew when his mind had already walked out the door. He just didn't have the decency to follow. The night she finally broke, it wasn't dramatic. She was folding laundry. The towel drawer stuck again, like it always did, and the force of her pulling it open sent everything toppling. Towels hit the floor. So did her folded sweatpants. A few socks scattered under the chair. She bent down to pick them up and froze. Not because of the mess, but because something inside her had caved. She sat down on the floor, towels in her lap, and covered her face with both hands. No sound, no tears yet. Just pressure building behind her eyes like her body was holding back everything all at once. Then, quietly, she cried. Slow, quiet sobs that weren't about heartbreak. They were about humiliation, about being made to feel disposable, about being traded like furniture. No woman wants to be told she's been replaced. But worse than that was how easy it was for him. He had looked her in the face and said, "She's moving in," like it was logistics, not betrayal, like Calla was a name he was done using. She stayed on the floor for 23 minutes, then stood up, put the towels away, wiped her face. She didn't call anyone. She didn't vent online. She cleaned her space, made tea, sat by the window and whispered to herself, "You will not be made small by this." She repeated it, twice, because she needed to believe it. The next day, she returned to work with Kyle's team and buried herself in spreadsheets. The property development proposal was at a critical stage. She had deadlines to meet. She preferred it that way. Kyle passed her once in the hallway and paused just briefly. "You good?" he asked. It was the first personal question he'd ever asked her. She didn't lie. "Had a moment yesterday," she said. He didn't pry. "Want space?" "No. Work helps." He gave a small nod, then kept walking. It was one of the kindest things anyone had done for her in weeks. That night, she journaled again. Not to pour out her heart, just to anchor her identity. She wrote, "I am allowed to grieve without looking broken. I am allowed to rebuild without revenge. I am allowed to move on without explanations." She underlined the last sentence. Riven had taken her dignity for granted, assumed she'd either lash out or shrink away. But Calla had no intention of playing to that expectation. She wouldn't scream in parking lots. She wouldn't beg for closure. She wouldn't text at 2 a.m. She wouldn't accidentally show up to places where he and Naraya might be. She would simply live, and let her quiet rebuild speak louder than any dramatic exit ever could. 2 days later, Kyle brought in pastries for the office team. No fanfare, just a brown paper bag, a few white boxes, and a sentence as he passed each person. No pressure. "Take what you want." When he reached her desk, he paused. "You like sweet or savory?" he asked. "Savory." He handed her a flaky pastry wrapped in paper. "Spinach and egg." "Thanks," she said. She didn't ask why he'd remembered. She didn't have to. There was something about the way Kyle treated people that reminded her what real respect looked like. He didn't flatter. He didn't hover. He didn't touch her shoulder in meetings, or stare too long, or make quiet compliments designed to confuse. He listened. He read her notes thoroughly. He followed up only when needed. She started to enjoy going to work, not because of romance, not even because of the job, but because it felt like a place where she wasn't mourning anymore. She was simply present. At the end of the week, she walked into the grocery store across from her building and ran into a woman she hadn't seen since the wedding. Soraya Hadley, tall, sharp cheekbones, one of Riven's business associates' wives. She spotted Calla near the self-checkout. "Oh, Calla, wow, it's been forever." Calla smiled faintly. "It has." Soraya looked her over, eyebrows rising just slightly at the flats and grocery tote. "I heard about everything," she said, voice low. "I was surprised, but also not surprised. If I'm being honest." Calla said nothing. "I mean, Naraya's always been around. Not sure how it started, but..." She trailed off, waiting for a reaction. Calla didn't give her one. Soraya continued. "You look good, though, considering..." Calla looked her in the eye. "I do look good, even not considering..." Soraya gave a tight smile. "Right, well, hang in there." Calla turned back to the register without replying, because she didn't need Soraya's pity, or insight, or veiled commentary. She bagged her vegetables, paid in cash, and walked home with her head high. That night, she wrote another entry. "Some people think surviving looks like weakness. Let them." And she slept soundly. For the first time in weeks, no dreams, just rest. The weekend passed without headlines, without texts, without news about Riven or the life he was building with Naraya. But Calla knew silence didn't mean absence. It meant people had grown tired of watching, or worse, moved on to watch someone else. She didn't care. Not anymore. That Sunday morning, she woke up before the alarm, brewed coffee, and opened her windows to let in the air. She sat on her small balcony with her legs crossed, hair unbrushed, and a pen in her hand. She wasn't journaling this time. She was making a list. A quiet one. She titled it, "Things I Am Reclaiming." 1. My mornings 2. My name 3. My time 4. My mind 5. My body 6. My peace 7. My privacy 8. My ability to want again 9. My permission to start over 10. My softness. She underlined that last one. Softness was what Riven had misjudged. He thought it meant weakness. He thought her restraint was passivity. He'd mistaken her calm for surrender. But Calla had learned that the strongest thing a woman can do is feel everything, and still choose to carry herself with grace. Work picked up speed the following week. Kyle's firm entered a bidding stage on a high-end residential project, and Kala was pulled into late-hour meetings, technical reviews, and community impact assessments. It was the kind of work that used every part of her brain. She liked the pace. It didn't let her linger too long in her own head. On Thursday, Kyle handed her a report to review and mentioned, without looking, there's a rooftop pitch session with our urban design partner next week. I want you there. Kala looked up. You sure? You prepared half of what they're going to present. Why wouldn't I be? She gave a slight nod, grateful, and kept reading. But inside, something uncurled, a feeling she hadn't tasted in months. Pride, not the external kind, not reputation or status, something quieter, the kind that comes from doing something well and knowing it matters. That evening, Kala stayed late to finish the final draft of the project scope. By the time she left the office, the streets were dark and the sidewalks quiet. She turned the corner near the bookstore and stopped outside the window. There it was again, her photo, not her face but her marriage. A glossy print of Riven and Naraya on the cover of a luxury real estate magazine. Power, passion, and property, the Dawn-Kess empire expands. She stared at it for one full breath, then pushed the door open, walked past the magazine stand, and bought a novel instead. Something about a woman who grows her own herbs and starts over in a small town. She smiled faintly at the symbolism. The clerk didn't recognize her. No one asked questions. As she walked out, she glanced at the glossy cover again. For the first time, she didn't feel anything. No sting, no heat in her chest, no impulse to compare. She kept walking. Kyle sent her a message later that night. Kay, you left your folder on the conference table. Want me to drop it off or bring it tomorrow? Kala, bring it tomorrow. It's nothing urgent. Kay, you're the only one I trust to keep our project timeline straight. It's urgent. She stared at the message for a moment, lips pressing into a soft smile. Then typed, Kala, I'll accept the compliment. Just this once. Kay, dangerous territory. Kala, I've survived worse. There was a long pause before he replied. Kay, that much is clear. The rooftop pitch happened the following Wednesday. Kala wore black trousers, a sand-colored blouse, and flats. She didn't try to look like anyone but herself. She arrived early, always did. Kyle was already there, reviewing layout boards. You're early, he said. So are you. He looked up at her, eyes steady. Didn't want to walk into the room without you. She raised a brow slightly but didn't question it. During the presentation, Kyle spoke little. He let Kala walk through the development plan, breaking down logistics, budgets, timeline targets, and potential zoning shifts. She didn't use filler words, didn't pause for effect. She let the information speak. When she finished, a few members of the board nodded. One woman murmured, efficient and clear. Impressive. Kyle said nothing, just looked at her like he already knew what they were just figuring out. After the session, as people packed up, he handed her a bottle of water. You did well. You expected otherwise. Never, he said. But sometimes it's nice to say it out loud. She didn't blush, but she did smile. For once, it wasn't about recovering from pain. It was about being seen for who she'd always been, without her past shadowing her presence. That night, Kyle walked her to the street corner near her apartment. He didn't ask to come up, didn't linger. They stood under the streetlight for a moment. Thank you for trusting me with today, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Thank you for doing it, like it was nothing. She hesitated. It wasn't nothing. I know. He nodded once. Hands in pockets. Calm. Good night, Kala. Good night, Kale. And then he turned and walked. She watched him go, then entered her building, climbed the stairs, and sat in. Her small kitchen with the lights off and the city glowing outside her window. Not once did she think of Riven that night. Not once did she wonder what Naraya would have worn to a rooftop meeting. Her mind was full of other things, her project notes, Kyle's quiet affirmation, and the steady, unhurried feeling in her chest. She didn't know if it was healing or hope, but whatever it was, it didn't need to be named. It just needed to be felt. Kala had always known how to keep her distance. Even in marriage, there were parts of her she kept tucked away, emotional instincts she learned to control early in life. She grew up in a house where expressing too much made you weak, where strength meant not needing anyone to see you cry. That wiring stayed with her, even through adulthood. But Kyle Rin was shifting something she didn't expect. He didn't pry, didn't flirt, didn't force connection. He noticed when she paused too long on a line of data, noticed when she pulled her sleeve over her wrist after checking her phone, noticed when she stayed behind after meetings pretending to check files but really catching her breath. He never called her out for it. He simply made space. The more he did that, the more she felt herself slowly putting the pieces back together. Not to become who she was before Riven, but to become who she had shelved for years. That version of herself, the quiet, clear, steady woman, deserved to be seen again. That Monday morning, Kyle invited her to join him at a site meeting in the Marina district. She said yes, not out of obligation but curiosity. They met at the corner lot, an abandoned property soon to be converted into housing and commercial space. The air smelled like salt and wood. Seabirds flapped overhead. She was reviewing her notes when he pointed to the far corner of the plot. "Tell me what you see," he said. She shielded her eyes and scanned the area. A waste of usable space, and poor access from the main road. If we adjust the corner entrance, foot traffic increases by at least 20%. He gave a low nod. "You're not guessing." "No, that's what makes you different." She glanced at him, cautious. "Different doesn't always get rewarded, with the wrong people," he said. "But not here." On the drive back, they stopped at a coffee place Kyle liked. Quiet, wood-paneled, not trendy. He paid. She offered. He didn't let her. They sat outside under a rusted green umbrella, watching traffic hum through narrow streets. "I haven't seen you check your phone today," he said. "I don't need to." He studied her. "No press lately?" She shrugged. "There might be. I've stopped looking. That's discipline." "No," she said. "That's self-respect." He smiled slightly, then looked down at his coffee. "I'm not going to pretend I know what that feels like," he said. "But I know what it's like to walk away from something that once felt permanent." Her eyes softened. "You walked away?" "I was engaged, years ago." She said I was too closed off, too focused. She wasn't wrong. "What happened?" She moved on, loudly. I moved on quietly. Kala exhaled. The quiet ones tend to last longer. They also tend to carry more. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Kyle asked, "Did you love him, truly?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes. I loved who he was at the start, but not at the end. He stopped being someone I recognized, and I stopped being someone he respected." Kyle nodded. "That's a hard truth. I lived in it for 2 years before he handed me papers." He looked at her, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. "You still speak without bitterness," he said. "I don't carry what doesn't feed me," she replied. They didn't say much else after that, but something between them shifted. Not romantically, not yet, but emotionally. They both knew what it felt like to be left behind without screaming about it, to be replaced, to be called too much or not enough, to survive it without becoming someone else. That evening, Kala returned home and opened her email. There it was, an invitation. "You are formally invited to the Dawn Foundation's annual winter fundraiser." She almost laughed. It was a recycled list, one she used to manage. She was still on it. The fundraiser was 2 weeks away. At the same downtown venue she once helped redesign for one of their biggest events. She stared at the RSVP button. Did she want to go? Did she want to walk into a room where Riven and Araya would be center stage? Did she want to be seen not as the discarded ex, but as someone fully, quietly intact? She closed the email without responding. She didn't need to decide yet. 2 days later, Kyle invited her to join a strategy dinner for key investors. It wasn't a test. It was trust. "I want you at the table," he said. "Not just as staff, as a mind." She paused. You sure they'll want me there? I don't ask for permission to respect people, he replied. She wore a navy dress that night. Clean lines, no jewelry. Kyle introduced her not as a consultant, but as our operations partner. The table nodded. Some smiled. A few looked surprised. She didn't try to impress them. She simply did what she always did: listen closely, speak only when it added value, and stay calm under questions. At one point, someone asked about her prior work in private equity spaces. She answered briefly, mentioned logistics, scale planning, and investor relations. She didn't mention Riven's name. She didn't need to. After the dinner, Kyle walked her to her rideshare. You were steady, he said. It's the one thing I know how to be. He looked at her for a long second. You're more than steady. She didn't reply. But she remembered the words as she rode home, alone, looking out the window. She wasn't building a new story yet, but she was no longer living in the old one. Kala didn't respond to the fundraiser invitation, not because she was avoiding it, but because she wasn't sure what her presence would serve. She didn't owe Riven a reaction, and she certainly didn't owe Naraya her silence or her performance. But part of her wanted to reclaim something. Not a room, not a moment, just her name. 2 days before the event, she reopened the email and clicked yes. She didn't tell anyone. Not Kyle. Not Briar. No one. She wasn't going to the fundraiser to confront her past. She was going because once upon a time, she helped build that space, designed the seating layout, worked with the event coordinator on the lighting and acoustic checks, even selected the non-profit partner. She didn't want her only memory of that place to be a man who didn't know how to stay loyal. If she was going to stand in that room again, she would do it on her own terms. She spent the day before the event like any other work day. No special treatments, no last-minute purchases, no panic. At lunch, Kyle passed by her desk and paused. You good for tomorrow? She looked up. What's tomorrow? He narrowed his eyes. Final zoning review. Oh, right. Yes, I'm ready. He nodded, but didn't walk off. You sure you're good? He asked again, more carefully. I'm not falling apart, she said. I didn't ask that. She met his gaze, held it for a moment. I'm going somewhere tomorrow night, somewhere I used to belong. He didn't ask where. He just said, wear the calm like you always do, and walked off. The night of the fundraiser, Kala wore black, not because it was safe, but because it was clean. A floor-length silk dress, sleeveless, paired with her natural curls, softly pinned to one side. She added a thin silver cuff, the only piece of jewelry she kept from her marriage. It had no inscription, no symbolism. It was a gift from herself after closing her first major contract 4 years ago. She arrived early, walked in alone. No one expected her. No one stopped her. The valet took her coat. The hostess scanned her name without reaction. The room was already buzzing, soft jazz, sparkling glassware, small clusters of laughter and low voices. She moved toward the back, not hiding, but watching. 5 minutes passed before she saw them. Riven in charcoal grey, Naraya in scarlet, matching smiles, walking like they were made for public attention. People greeted them like royalty. Riven shook hands. Naraya laughed into cheeks with calculated warmth. Kala didn't look away. She didn't shrink. She simply existed. And that was more powerful than any entrance. She took a glass of sparkling water and walked toward the artwork near the east wall. A photography exhibit she once helped curate. One of the prints still had her original plaque design. You came... The voice behind her didn't surprise her. She turned slowly. Riven stood there, 2 feet away, hands in his pockets. Not smug, not embarrassed. Just observing. Kala offered a polite smile. So did you... He looked her over. You look... different. I look like myself, she said. I mean, stronger. She tilted her head. I wasn't weak. You were just too distracted to notice. His eyes dropped for a second. I didn't think you'd show. You never did have much imagination. He gave a quiet, bitter laugh. Still sharp. She met his gaze fully. still standing. There was a silence between them that used to feel like tension. Now it felt like distance, earned, clean, necessary. Riven took a sip of his drink. You moved on quickly. She raised an eyebrow. What gave you that idea? He shrugged. Saw your name attached to a new firm. Kyle Rin's team. People are talking. People talk when they're bored. Is he more than business? Kala smiled, genuinely, softly. You don't get to ask those questions anymore. I know. More silence. He added, I didn't expect you to be this okay. She leaned in slightly, voice low but steady. That's because you thought I was only whole when I had your name attached to mine. He didn't speak. She continued, the thing you never understood, Riven, is that I never needed you. I chose you. That's the difference. I made a mistake. She didn't flinch. No, you made a decision. A mistake would have needed regret. He opened his mouth, then closed it. She took a small sip of her drink. You should get back to her, Kala said. She's scanning the room, looking for you. He turned to look. Naraya was indeed glancing around, lips tight. Riven hesitated. Kala stepped past him. Enjoy the Empire, she said over her shoulder. He didn't follow. Later, as she stepped out onto the building's private balcony, she breathed in the cold air. Let it fill her lungs. The door behind her opened. She turned, expecting a staff member. It was Kyle. He closed the door softly behind him. I had a feeling, he said. How? You showed up today like someone who was conserving emotional energy. She nodded. That obvious? Only if you know how to watch for it. He walked beside her. I didn't come here for him, she said. I came for me. I figured, he said. You did what most people never do. You faced the thing that tried to erase you. She didn't respond. He continued, you didn't let it win. She looked at him for a long time. Why are you here? I had a meeting upstairs, he said. Then I saw you on the guest list. She raised a brow. You checked the list? He shrugged. I noticed the name. Didn't know if it was that Kala. I do now. He leaned against the railing beside her. You handled him like a queen, he said. She looked away. I didn't plan to. Exactly why it worked. He pulled something from his pocket, a folded square of paper. He handed it to her. She opened it. It was a sketched map, the new lot layout they had discussed 2 weeks ago. Still thinking about that foot traffic problem? She asked. Always, he said. But I wanted your eyes on it again, after tonight. With new clarity. She nodded slowly. I'll take a look. Kyle hesitated. Want me to walk you out? She paused, then said, not tonight. He respected that. He didn't push. He simply said, then I'll see you Monday. And he left her standing alone on the balcony. Not empty, not broken, just her own. Kala didn't cry after the fundraiser. Not on the ride home. Not when she took off her shoes. Not when she unpinned her hair and saw her reflection in the mirror. She didn't feel hollow either. She felt complete. Not because she'd said something powerful. Not because she confronted Riven. But because she had walked into the fire he thought she couldn't handle and walked out untouched. There was power in that. Quiet, unshaken power. She hung the black dress carefully in the back of her wardrobe. Not to keep it for memories, but because she knew it wasn't finished. It would have another night, another story, another purpose. Her story wasn't closing. It was maturing. The next morning, she made coffee and sat by her small window as the city woke. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Kyle. Kay, you good? She replied without thinking. Kala, better than good. A few seconds later, he sent another. Kay. That makes 2 of us. She stared at the screen for a moment, then locked the phone and smiled. Work resumed as usual, but the dynamic had changed. There was an ease now, a quiet understanding between her and Kyle that didn't need to be explained. They had crossed an invisible threshold. They hadn't touched. They hadn't confessed anything. But they saw each other now fully, and that changed everything. On Tuesday, he called her into the main boardroom, where their design team had finalized renderings for the Marina District project. She stood at the table, reviewing layouts, when he stepped beside her. "Take the lead on this presentation," he said. Calla turned to him. "You sure?" He didn't blink. "No one else sees the entire scope like you do." She hesitated. "If this goes wrong, that's on me. If this goes right, that's also on you," he said. "And it will." She held his gaze. "Okay," she said. Kyle stepped back. Let her work. When the clients arrived, 2 real estate investors and a development strategist, Calla stood at the head of the table, calm and composed, walking them through the financial projections, the sustainability plan, and the site risk factors. Her voice never wavered. She didn't try to impress them. She just delivered truth. The room stayed quiet when she finished. Then the older investor said, "I've heard your name before." Calla smiled faintly. "Good things, I hope." "Effective things," he said. That was better than good. After they left, Kyle stood at the door and waited for the room to empty. "You just bought us 3 months of lead time," he said. She didn't pretend to be modest. "I know." He gave her a rare full smile. "Next week, I'm introducing you as Project CEO Director." She blinked. "You're serious?" "I don't offer titles to make people feel good. I offer them when they're earned." Calla looked away for a moment, just to steady herself. When she looked back, she said, "Then I'll accept." Kyle nodded once. That was it. No handshake, no celebration, just acknowledgement. The kind that made her feel more seen than a million flowers ever could. Later that evening, she stopped by the cafe near her apartment, the one with mismatched chairs and too many succulents in the window. She ordered her usual peppermint tea, almond biscotti. The cashier, a college student with shy eyes, asked, "Would you like a bag?" She paused, then shook her head. "No, I'll stay a while." She sat by the window, pulled out her journal, and flipped to a blank page. Rebuilding doesn't mean pretending it didn't break. It means standing where it cracked and choosing to live anyway. She closed the journal after writing it. That was enough for one night. Across town, Riven Dawn sat in his penthouse suite with a glass of whiskey. In one hand, scrolling through the press recap from the fundraiser. There was a single line at the end of one article that read, "Former partner Calla Vienne made a rare appearance, elegant and poised." Observers noted a distinct shift in confidence and direction. He read it twice. Then again. Naraya entered the room, phone in hand. "We're scheduled for that branding interview on Thursday. I told them to shoot at the office." He nodded without looking up. She narrowed her eyes. "Something wrong?" He tossed his phone onto the coffee table. "No, but everything felt off." He hadn't expected Calla to be so clear, so unbothered, so intact. It was easier to believe he'd left her behind when she stayed quiet. Now that he saw her again, saw how much she had grown, something in him flickered. Not regret. He wasn't ready to admit that. But awareness. A sharp one. He turned to look at Naraya. She was scrolling, replying to messages, managing optics. Calla had never done any of that. She didn't build presence through attention. She built it through consistency. And now, the woman he thought he'd outgrown had become something untouchable. He stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the city lights. He had the penthouse, the deal flow, the press, but for the first time, none of it felt like enough. Calla didn't hear from Riven again after the fundraiser. No texts, no emails, no sudden apologies or long messages claiming he made a mistake. And she preferred it that way. It wasn't closure she was waiting for. It was forward motion, and every day she moved a little further from the version of herself that once tolerated being invisible. At work, her new title began to take shape. Emails started with CEO Director now. Teams reported to her. Calls came through her line. And while some tried to test her, second-guessing her decisions, brushing over her insights, she didn't react emotionally. She responded with facts, grace, and quiet authority. Kyle watched it all happen without interfering. He didn't hover or try to explain her presence to others. He simply created space and let her rise. The others followed because they had no choice. Respect was no longer a request. It was a requirement. On Friday afternoon, she stayed behind after the final design sync. Kyle was still at his desk, sleeves rolled up, reviewing vendor estimates. "Want to grab something?" he asked, glancing up. Kala hesitated. "Like food, like dinner, or a late lunch, whatever you want to call it." She raised a brow. "Work, dinner." He shrugged. "If that makes it easier." She considered it for a beat, then nodded. "All right." They left the office together, walking a few blocks until Kyle stopped in front of a quiet Thai restaurant with weathered green doors and gold accents. "You've been here before?" she asked. "I come when I don't want to be seen." That was answer enough. They sat near the back. No one bothered them. No cameras. No small talk from people they half recognized. Just plates of jasmine rice, grilled vegetables, and soft curry. Kyle didn't rush the meal. He didn't fill the space with empty words. He waited until halfway through before speaking up. "You know you changed the way this office runs," he said. Kala looked up, surprised. "You brought clarity," he continued. "Not just to schedules, to people." "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said. "You stayed consistent when everything around you shifted." She met his gaze. "You don't speak like most men in power." "I don't lead like most men in power," he said. "I've watched people destroy their teams trying to prove something. I'm not interested in that." There was silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was weighted, thoughtful. Then Kyle asked, "Do you still think about him?" Kala didn't dodge it. "Not the man he became. I think about the man he was. The one I thought I'd grow old with." Kyle nodded. "That's fair." She stirred her tea. "What about you? Do you still think about the one who left?" He exhaled. "I think about the things I didn't say, the way I held everything too tightly. I thought silence was safety." "It's not," Kala said softly. "No," he agreed. "It just delays the break." Their eyes held for a second too long. Then she looked away. "I'm not ready for anything." He leaned back slightly. "I didn't ask you to be." She looked at him again. And for the first time since Riven, she didn't feel guarded. She felt understood. They walked back slowly. When they reached her building, Kyle stopped near the steps. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For being who you are, even when it costs you." She smiled gently. "I didn't know there was another way." He didn't try to come inside. He didn't linger. He just looked at her and said, "Monday's going to be a long one. Get some rest. You too." And he left. That night, Kala sat by the window with her journal. She opened to a clean page and wrote, "I don't need to rush toward anything, but I will no longer run from what feels real." She closed the book. And she didn't dream about the past. She slept without interruption. Saturday morning, her phone buzzed. An email from a former event coordinator who once worked under her. The subject line read, "Are you interested in taking on a speaking slot?" Kala blinked. The message was short. A professional women's summit downtown. Mid-level executives, entrepreneurs, designers. The coordinator had recommended her to speak on the topic, grace under pressure, staying grounded when life shifts. There was a time she would have said no immediately. Too public, too exposed, too close to being dissected by strangers. But now she didn't feel like hiding. She typed her reply with steady hands. "Yes. I'd be honored." Monday came fast, and so did news from a contractor Kyle had warned her about, a subcontractor, trying to reroute payments, delay timelines, and overbill. It was the kind of issue that could stall the entire project, if not handled fast. Kala took the call, asked for a second copy of the paperwork, looped in finance, and CC'd Kyle with notes. She didn't panic. She didn't wait for someone else to step in. She handled it. By noon, the billing issue was neutralized. By 2, the subcontractor's assistant had apologized for the error. Kyle stopped by her office before leaving for the day. "You fixed it." She nodded. That's what I do. He smiled slightly. You want to co-lead the investor call Wednesday? She raised a brow. You're not afraid I'll scare them off? I'm counting on it, he said. Then he left. That night, she didn't work late. She walked home with her headphones in, soft music playing, the cool wind brushing her shoulders. Her coat wrapped close, her steps firm. She passed by a boutique window and saw her reflection. For a split second, she paused, not to study her face, but to acknowledge it. She looked strong, at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because she no longer needed it to be. She walked on, and this time, she didn't look back. The morning of the summit arrived with no fanfare, no nerves, no wardrobe crisis. Calla dressed simply, black pants, crisp white blouse, short heels, no bright colors, no loud accessories, just presence. She didn't need to perform. She just needed to show up. She tied her hair in a low twist and carried only what mattered: a pen, a slim notebook, her talking points, and one sentence folded on a small piece of paper. You don't owe the room your pain, only your truth. She had written it the night before, right before turning off the light. The event was held in a mid-rise hotel ballroom with soft lighting and minimalist staging. Rows of women, mostly in their 30s and 40s, filled the chairs. Some took notes. Others watched quietly. A few clutched coffee cups like shields. Calla understood them all. She sat backstage while the host introduced the panel. There were 3 of them, a tech CEO, a non-profit director, and her. As she walked onto the stage, she didn't look for a friendly face in the crowd. She didn't need validation. She had already earned her place. When it was her turn to speak, she stood, not because she wanted attention, but because some truths deserved to be delivered standing. She didn't share the full story. No names, no drama, no scandal. She simply said, I've rebuilt my life in silence twice. Once after losing someone to ambition, and again after remembering my own. The room stayed still. She talked about structure, about decision-making under pressure, about being replaced in a space she built with her bare hands, and choosing not to fight for the structure, but to rebuild her center. She told them, dignity is louder than drama, even if no one's listening. Someone in the front row wiped a tear. Calla didn't pause for effect. She didn't modulate her voice to sound like strength. She simply told the truth. When she finished, the applause was quiet at first. Then it grew, not thunderous, but real. Not one person rushed her afterward. They approached slowly, thoughtfully. A woman said, You helped me understand that stillness isn't weakness. Another whispered, I thought I was alone in trying to look okay after losing everything. Calla stayed calm through all of it, until she stepped outside and found Kyle leaning against the brick wall by the valet stand. He wasn't supposed to be there. She froze. How? Saw your name on the flyer in the cafe window. You came all the way here for a talk. No, he said. I came here to see if the version of you the world's finally noticing is the one I've been working with for months. Her lips parted. And? She asked. He took a step forward. She's even more composed in front of strangers. She smiled. You think I was performing? No, I think you were delivering peace in public. He held her gaze. And I wanted to witness it. She looked down for a second, then back at him. Thank you. He nodded once. You hungry? She paused. Always. They walked 2 blocks down to a small Mediterranean place she hadn't been to before. It was warm inside, quiet enough for private conversation, and bright enough to feel honest. They ordered shawarma bowls and sparkling water. Sat by the window. Kyle leaned back, one arm over the chair beside him. You ever think about what's next? You mean career? Life? Calla considered. I used to think I wanted a predictable life, one that felt safe, ordered, known. Then I married someone who said he wanted the same thing, until he didn't. Kyle didn't interrupt. So now, she continued, I want a life that feels like mine, not one I have to shrink inside to keep. He nodded slowly. Good answer. She looked up. Your turn. Kyle's eyes held hers. I want something steady, but not quiet. Something real, even if it's complicated. She felt something shift between them again. That unspoken current. It wasn't rushing them. It wasn't demanding clarity. It was simply there. I'm not good at rushing into things, she said softly. I'm not good at forcing them. They left it at that. No promises, no confessions, just truth shared between two people who had learned how to live through silence. Later that night, she sat in her apartment with the windows open and the journal open on her lap. She wrote, "Being loved doesn't mean being rescued. It means being recognized. And I am finally starting to recognize myself again." She didn't close the book. She let the ink dry while she made tea. And for the first time in years, she lit a candle, not for ambiance, not for guests, not for distraction, but for herself. Kyle didn't call the next day. He didn't text either. And Kala didn't mind. Whatever was growing between them, it wasn't loud or impatient. It didn't demand daily check-ins or fill quiet with distractions. It was the kind of connection that respected space. She spent the afternoon reviewing schedules for the Marina District, project and finalizing logistics for the next board presentation. Her calendar was full, but for the first time, she didn't feel buried in it. She was in control now, of her days, of her voice, of the way her name was spoken in rooms that once overlooked her. At 5:48 p.m., just as she was about to shut her laptop, Kale's name appeared on her phone. "Kay, you still like rooftops?" She smiled. "Kala, when they're not full of photographers." "Kay, I'm sending an address. Don't worry, it's private." She paused before replying, then sent, "Kala, I'll be there in 30. The building was old, brick and iron, tucked in a quiet corner near the edge of the city. No luxury signage, no lobby music, just a clean-coded keypad and a single light by the elevator. She took it to the top floor. When the doors opened, Kyle was waiting near a side exit, sleeves rolled, hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything, just held the door open. She stepped outside and found herself on a rooftop, lined with string lights and planters. Not a restaurant, not a venue, just space. Real, open, personal. She turned to him. "You live here?" He nodded. "Converted warehouse. Bought it after my dad passed." She stepped forward, taking in the skyline. "It's beautiful. It's quiet," he said. "I need quiet more than luxury." She glanced at him. "We keep ending up on rooftops." He smiled. "Seems like the only place we both breathe." He motioned to a small table with 2 plates already set. Nothing extravagant. Grilled vegetables, roasted chicken, a bottle of sparkling water and 2 short glasses. "You cooked?" she asked. "I called in favors," he said. "But I plated it." They sat. For the first few minutes, they just ate. No rush, no tension. Then he said, "You know, you could have disappeared. I almost did. But you didn't." Kala looked at her fork. "I thought about running. About taking a job in another state, changing my number, erasing everything. But I knew if I did, he'd win." Kale watched her carefully. "And staying?" "Staying meant rebuilding with people who weren't trying to rescue me. Just respect me." "You've done more than that." She shook her head. "It still feels fragile sometimes. Like it could all fall apart if I blink too long." "It won't," he said. "You're not rebuilding. You're anchoring." She blinked. That word, anchor. She hadn't felt anchored in years. After dinner, they moved to the edge of the rooftop, where 2 chairs faced the city skyline. The lights blinked in slow pulses. Somewhere, a soft hum of music played from another building. Kyle sat first. Then Kala joined him, pulling her coat tighter. He glanced at her. "You cold?" "I'm okay." He didn't offer his jacket. He didn't fuss. He just sat with her, and that was enough. Minutes passed. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt like 2 people breathing at the same time. Then Kyle said, "You don't owe me honesty, but I'll take it if you're offering." Kala turned to him. "Ask." Are you afraid to let someone hold space for you again? She didn't answer right away, then quietly said, yes. Because the last person who held space also erased me when it no longer served him. Kyle nodded. You don't have to hand over trust, just let it stay on the table. She looked at him, eyes steady. And if I need time, then I'll wait, he said. Not forever. But long enough to prove I'm not looking for a version of you that's easier. The wind shifted slightly. Kala looked out at the buildings, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I'm ready for, Kyle replied without pause. Then let's start with this. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't ask for more. He just stayed beside her while the city lit the sky. They sat until the lights from the tallest tower blinked once, twice, then dimmed to a glow. When she stood to leave, he walked her to the elevator. No touch, just presence. Before the doors closed, she looked up at him and said, Thank you for not asking me to be anything more than I am. He smiled softly. The woman you are is already enough. The doors closed, and she exhaled. For once, the night didn't end in silence. It ended in stillness. And stillness wasn't emptiness. It was trust, beginning to take root. The following week moved differently. Kala noticed it not in the obvious things, but in the quiet shifts. She smiled more without realizing it. Her steps felt lighter, her body less guarded. She answered questions in meetings with more ease, less apology. She stopped checking rooms for familiar faces she hoped not to see. She'd never said it aloud, but some part of her was starting to feel safe again. Not because someone gave her safety, but because she was no longer offering herself to people who didn't know what to do with her. The week was stacked with meetings, revisions, city feedback. Kyle was away for 2 days in Seattle, meeting with a partner group. They didn't text much, just one short message after his flight landed. Kay, still breathing. Kala, barely, but efficiently. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. She liked that about him. He didn't smother her with attention or praise. He gave her space to exist, no spotlight, no performative interest. And it made his presence matter more. On Thursday afternoon, she stepped into the break room to refill her tea. 2 junior designers were already there, whispering. They fell silent when she entered. She didn't flinch. Just walked to the counter, refilled her cup, and turned. You don't have to stop talking, she said, her voice calm. Just make sure it's true. One of them blinked. We didn't mean. I'm not asking, she said, meeting their eyes. Just warning you. I didn't fight this hard to rebuild my name for it to be twisted again. They stood frozen. Kala walked out. No apology, no explanation. She didn't need either. Later, she told Kyle about it in passing. He didn't offer to handle it. He didn't ask for names. He simply said, You shut that down. I did. Good, he said. That's how names become untouchable. That weekend, she received another email from Riven. Subject, I want to talk. She stared at it for a long time. The message was short. Kala, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I'm not proud of how I handled things. I'd like to sit down if you're open to it. Not for closure, just clarity. No signature, no line break, no fluff. She didn't reply right away. She closed the laptop, poured herself a glass of water, stepped outside to her balcony and sat under the sky, her breath stilling. She wasn't angry, not anymore. She was cautious. Later that night, she called Briar. I got an email, she said. From him? Yeah. Briar was quiet for a beat. Do you want to meet? I don't know. I don't need an apology. Sometimes the power's in hearing it anyway. Kala exhaled. I'm not scared to see him, she said. I'm scared of giving him a reaction he doesn't deserve. Then give him nothing but your peace, Briar said. Let that be the last thing he remembers. She replied the next morning. Kala, 1 hour. Public place. No questions about my life. He responded an hour later. Riven, understood. You choose the place. She picked a quiet brunch spot, tucked near Lake Merritt. Neutral, bright, forgettable. When she arrived, He was already seated. He stood when she approached. Old habit. She didn't offer a hug, just sat. He looked different, older, not in years, but in weight. Like decisions had finally started to press on him. He folded his hands. "I appreciate you coming," he said. She nodded once. "Talk." He looked around, as if searching for the right way to begin. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," he said. "I left because I didn't know how to be loved like that anymore." Kala didn't respond. He went on. "I chose what was easier, flashier, something that didn't require reflection." "I know," she said. He blinked. "You do? I always knew. I just didn't say it out loud because I wanted to believe you'd eventually say it for yourself." He looked down. "I handled it badly. You handled it like a man who didn't want to face his own failure," she said. "And you thought replacing me would hide the fact that you were the one who had changed." He swallowed hard. "I was afraid you'd always be better than me." "That's not love," Kala said. "That's insecurity." Silence stretched between them. He finally asked, "Are you happy now?" She sipped her drink. "That's not a question you're allowed to ask anymore." He nodded. "I figured." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm not here for a chapter you want to reopen," she said. "I'm here to make sure you understand the door has been closed. Fully. Quietly. Permanently." He took a breath like he had expected that, but needed to hear it out loud. Kala stood. "I hope you find what you're looking for, but it won't be behind me." And then she left. She didn't turn back, didn't check if he watched her go. She walked down the sidewalk, sunlight warming her skin, spine straight. Her hand went into her coat pocket and wrapped around the note she'd slipped in there that morning. "You don't rise by explaining your worth. You rise by embodying it." And that's exactly what she did. Kala didn't cry after the meeting with Riven. She didn't shake. She didn't even need to sit down once she left the cafe. She walked straight to the edge of the lake, sat on a bench facing the water, and let the wind braid through her hair while children shouted in the distance and joggers passed without noticing her. She had seen the man who once made her feel like home, and realized he was now just a man trying to rewrite his own ending. But her story had already moved on, and this time she wasn't letting anyone pull her back to the prologue. Kyle called her that night. Not about work, not with an agenda. His voice was calm as always, but something in his tone felt closer than usual. "I wasn't sure if you'd want space tonight," he said. "I do." "Got it," he replied. "But not from you." There was a silence. Then, "Want me to come pick you up?" "No," she said, "but I'd like to come over. If that's all right." She didn't ask to be invited. She stated her choice. Kyle said nothing for 2 seconds, then answered, "I'll unlock the elevator." His place looked the same. String lights on the rooftop, softly glowing, table. Cleared, the same calm in the air that always made her breath settle. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't push her to talk. Instead, he handed her a cup of tea, then walked her to the rooftop, chairs, and sat beside her as she stared out into the quiet skyline. After 10 minutes, she finally spoke. "I saw him. I figured. He said he left because he couldn't handle the way I loved." Kyle stayed still. She continued, "He admitted he made a choice, not a mistake. That's a rare truth." Kala looked down at her cup. "I thought I'd feel more satisfaction hearing it. And I just felt tired." Kyle nodded slowly. "Because closure doesn't always free us. It just ends the noise." They sat in silence again. She glanced sideways. "Do you think we make the same mistakes twice? Only if we ignore the part of ourselves that changed." She turned her head. "And if we haven't fully changed yet, then we let the right people witness the process." Their eyes met. No movement, just understanding. Kala didn't look away. "I'm not healed all the way," she said, "but I'm not bleeding anymore." Kyle nodded. "Then let's walk from here. No confession, no title, no kiss, but something passed between them. A shift, a quiet agreement. Whatever came next would not be rushed, but it would be real. Over the next week, the energy between them became steady, not heightened. Not flirty, grounded. They worked side by side as CO directors, shared meals when schedules allowed, and left space for both breath and boundaries. There was a quiet rhythm forming, and neither of them disrupted it with unnecessary questions. On Friday, after back-to-back meetings, Kyle handed her a small folder. "What's this?" "Something I've been sketching," he said. She opened it and found early drafts of a side project, a wellness retreat built on the edge of an old vineyard site he'd acquired years ago but never developed. "Why show me this?" she asked. "Because it's more than strategy, and I don't trust many people with things that still live in the vision phase." She traced her finger along one of the notations. "It's good. You've already laid out infrastructure potential." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." She looked up. "You want me to join?" "I want you to lead it with me." Kala didn't answer right away. Because this wasn't just work. This was legacy. "Let me think on it," she said softly. Kyle nodded. "Take your time." That night, she stood in front of her apartment mirror and looked at herself. Not her clothes, not her makeup, not her hair. Just herself. She whispered, "You're not a placeholder," and meant it. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of being replaced, because she wasn't standing on borrowed ground anymore. She had built her own. Kala took 3 days to consider Kyle's offer, not because she doubted her ability to lead, but because this project wasn't about logistics or management, it was about vision. And for the first time in years, someone was asking her not just to organize what existed, but to help build something that didn't yet. The vineyard property wasn't just land. It was untouched possibility, and Kyle hadn't pitched it like a business move. He had placed it in front of her like a quiet invitation. "Come build something with me that reflects what we value." That kind of trust didn't come often. She sat in the quiet of her studio Monday morning, tea cooling beside her, her fingers tracing the pages of the proposal. He hadn't overloaded it with detail. Just the right amount to say, "I'm serious, but I want your fingerprints on this too." By 9:12 a.m., she sent a reply. "Kala, let's build it." The response came 6 minutes later. "Kyle, good. We start shaping the team next week." When she walked into the office later that morning, the air felt different. Not because the staff knew, they didn't, but because she knew. She was no longer just co-directing a project. She was co-authoring a future. Kyle didn't bring it up until lunch. They stood by the window in the small conference room, sipping espresso from tiny glass mugs. "I want to call it the Reseed Project," he said. Kala blinked. "Reseed?" He nodded. "Not a retreat, not an escape, just a space where people can start again." Her chest tightened slightly. She whispered, "That word means something to me. I figured it would." She met his gaze. "You planned this. I watched you grow," he said. "Now I want to see what happens when you plant things." It wasn't romantic, but it was personal, and to Kala, that meant more. That night, she met Briar at the cafe near the lake. They sat outside under the patio heaters, sharing a plate of fries and almond tea. "He trusts you," Briar said after hearing about the vineyard. "I know." "And?" Kala stared into her cup. "And I trust him too, in a way I didn't expect." Briar leaned in. "Are you in love with him?" Kala didn't flinch. "No, not yet. But you could be." Kala exhaled. "Maybe." Briar smiled. "You always were careful." "I have to be." "No," Briar said softly. "You used to be. Now you choose to be." There was a difference. Kala could feel it now. Careful wasn't fear anymore. It was wisdom. Over the next week, Kala and Kyle carved out early plans for the Reseed project. They outlined 5 program spaces: nature rehabilitation, creative restoration, solo immersion, shared community time, and quiet recovery. Kyle took the financial modeling. Kala mapped the flow of energy, how guests would move, rest, participate, pause. "You don't design like an architect," he told her one night. She glanced up. "No? You design like someone who's survived disappointment." She paused. Is that a bad thing? Kyle shook his head. It's the most human kind of design I've seen. Midweek, a woman from the city's planning office visited to discuss environmental clearance. She recognized Kala immediately. You used to be married to Dawn, right? Kala's posture didn't shift. I used to be. The woman smiled awkwardly. You handled that well. Quiet, professional. Kala tilted her head. Silence isn't always weakness. No, the woman replied. Sometimes it's the loudest answer. After she left, Kyle walked in with a tablet. She recognized you? Yes. He didn't ask how she felt about it. He just said, she'll never forget what she saw today. Which part? The woman who didn't need to explain herself. Friday evening, Kyle brought her a copy of the early draft of the Reseed Project's pitch deck. He handed it to her, then turned to leave. She stopped him. Kyle. He turned back. She looked up from the deck. Why me? He didn't hesitate. Because you don't sell yourself. You show up and stay standing. That's rarer than people think. Kala looked down, her voice low. What if I still don't know how to be with someone yet? Kyle walked over, resting both hands on the edge of her desk. Then let me say something, and you don't have to answer. Okay. I'm not building this project to get closer to you. She looked at him, surprised. I'm building it because I already am. She inhaled. That sounds like a line. No, he said. A line would need an audience. This is just for you. She swallowed. I don't know what to say. You don't have to. Just be honest if the moment ever feels like it wants more. He started to walk away again. Kyle, she said. He turned. She met his eyes, steady. I'm still learning how to trust this. He nodded. Then I'll keep showing up until it stops feeling like risk. That night, she wrote in her journal, what if love doesn't rush in? What if it walks beside you slowly until you finally notice you were never alone? And she slept with the windows open, because she no longer feared what silence would say to her. She was listening now. The Reseed project came to life faster than Kala expected. Within 10 days, they had a short list of landscape architects, a consulting wellness advisor from Oregon, and a brand strategist who spoke Kala's language, minimal, meaningful, human. Kyle didn't hover. He let her take the reins. She coordinated the first cross-to-team session, built the priority roadmap, and drafted the client-facing communication plan. It wasn't just structure, it was story. Her fingerprints weren't just on paper anymore. They were in the rhythm of the entire project. By the time the first client preview deck was ready, Kyle looked at her across the meeting table and said, You realize you're building the thing I didn't know how to start without you. Kala didn't smile. She nodded. And I'm doing it without needing to be rescued. He leaned back in his chair. That's why it works. Outside of work, their rhythm continued. Not romantic yet, but steady. Sometimes he walked her to her building. Sometimes she brought him coffee without asking. He never touched her without permission, never tried to take more than she gave. But on the Friday after the preview deck was finalized, something shifted. They were walking through the half-cleared vineyard plot for the first time in person. It was golden hour, light stretching across the hills, turning the weeds soft and the future more visible. Kala stood still at the edge of the sloping land and whispered, This is where I would build the cabin. Right here, facing west. Kyle stepped beside her. Why? Because people need something to walk toward at the end of the day, she said. Some place to feel safe. He didn't respond. Not with words. He just looked at her for a long moment. Then said, We should start the architectural drafts. But his eyes stayed on her, even after he turned. That night, he sent her a photo, the view from that exact spot. Kay, you were right. The light knows where to land. She replied, Kala, I'm learning to trust that. The following week, Kyle invited her to dinner again. This time, at his place. No rooftop, no restaurant, just a quiet meal in his kitchen. She arrived with dessert, something simple, just fruit and dark chocolate, and found him cooking. He didn't try to impress her. The food was real, warm, and thoughtful. Grilled chicken, roasted root vegetables, garlic rice, After the plates were cleared, they stood by the sink washing dishes together like they'd done it for years. It wasn't until they both reached for the same towel that the silence shifted. Their hands touched. Calla paused. Kyle didn't pull away. He looked at her. Quiet, intentional. "May I?" he asked. Her chest rose slowly. "Yes." And with that, he leaned in, not urgently, not hungrily, just enough. Their lips met softly. Once. He didn't deepen it. He didn't reach for more. He just held her with stillness and respect. When they parted, her eyes didn't lower. They held his, and she whispered, "Thank you for not making this about a moment." He smiled. "It never was." She stepped back slightly. "I don't want to rush anything. I wouldn't let you." Calla didn't tell anyone. Not Briar. Not her sister. Not even her journal. Some moments are too sacred for words. They have to breathe first. The next day at work, she stayed late to finalize an updated version of the presentation for the reseed board. Kyle passed her desk before leaving. He paused. "You good?" She looked up. "Better than I've been in a long time." He nodded. "That makes two of us." She tilted her head. "You sure?" He shrugged. "I've waited a long time to work beside someone who sees the same future. Now that she's here, I'm not letting her burn out." She smiled. "I'll close the file in 10. He left without needing to check again. And that trust, that quiet trust, was the most intimate thing of all. Later that night, Calla sat on her balcony sipping tea. She didn't check headlines, didn't scroll through old memories, didn't worry about whether she was moving too fast or too slow. She was moving, in her own rhythm. She opened her journal, and this time, she didn't write about pain. She wrote this: "Love doesn't demand clarity in the beginning, it just asks for honesty along the way." And that's what she had now. Honesty, not perfect plans, but presence. And that was enough. The day of the reseed investor presentation arrived with the kind of sharp morning clarity Calla liked best. No fog, no half light, just clear skies and sharper vision. She wore soft navy slacks and a cream blouse. No bold colors, no overdone effort, just clean lines and quiet confidence. The only thing she added was a gold pin her mother had given her when she landed her first internship in college. "For courage," her mother had said. As Calla adjusted it near her collarbone, she looked in the mirror and said softly, "I built this. No one gets to take it from me." The presentation was being held in a restored greenhouse just outside the city, one of the pilot sites for the upcoming land recovery efforts. It wasn't just about investors, it was about legitimacy. The people in that room weren't used to being led by someone who looked like her. Young, female, soft-spoken, uninterested in proving herself through volume. But Kyle knew. He positioned her at the front, let her lead the vision, stepped back when she started to speak. Her opening line wasn't loud, but it landed. "Reseed is not a project, it's an answer." Silence. She let it sit before continuing. "It's what happens when soil is no longer treated like waste, when people who've worked land all their lives are given equity, not just assignments. When restoration meets revenue." She walked them through the phases, not with hype, with calm precision. Every slide held a principle, every stat a reason. And when she closed the pitch, she said, "You're not funding a model, you're restoring dignity. The land remembers. And so do the people." The room erupted, not into claps, into investment questions. 3 hands shot up before Kyle even stood. By the end of the day, they had verbal commitments from 5 new partners. After the crowd dispersed and vendors began clearing, Calla slipped to the back patio of the greenhouse and sat quietly under the lemon tree. Kyle found her there. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her and passed her a cold bottle of water. She took a long sip. "You didn't say much in there." "I didn't need to." She smiled. "You proud?" "Calla," he said, "that was the best pitch I've seen in 10 years, and it was yours." She let that truth land, then said, "I used to think power had to be loud." Kyle shook his head. "Real power is clarity. You had that today. She turned to him. So, what now? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folder. This is yours. She opened it. It was a new contract, executive partner, equity stake, autonomy clauses. She looked up. This isn't a promotion, he said. This is correction. I should have brought you in like this from the start. Her voice caught slightly. You mean that? Every line. She looked down at the contract again, and then signed, right there, under the lemon tree. No theatrics, just truth. That night, they didn't go out. Kyle invited her over again. Same apartment, same kitchen, same rhythm. But this time, she brought something else, a small packet of wildflower seeds. She handed them to him. For the cabin site, he looked at the packet, then at her. These bloom slowly. She nodded. But they come back stronger every season. Kyle touched the edge of the packet, then leaned forward. This time, their kiss was longer, still slow, still safe, but deeper, like something had been claimed, not possession, not performance, but presence. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead to hers. You feel safe here? He asked. I do. You feel seen? She exhaled. For the first time in years, he cupped her face. Then let's keep moving at your pace. Later that night, as they sat curled up on the couch, sharing small stories from the past, she finally told him something she hadn't told anyone else. I almost left this city last year, she said. Kyle's hand paused mid-stroke against her arm. Why? Everything felt stuck. My career, my peace, even my sense of self. And now, I feel like I'm building something that won't collapse under someone else's ego. Kyle didn't speak for a long time, then said, I hope you never feel small around me. She looked up. I don't. Not even once. She shook her head. Not even once. He drove her home that night. Didn't stay over. Didn't invite her to. Boundaries stayed clear. But affection no longer lingered in silence. It was spoken, shown, lived. And when she walked into her apartment, her phone buzzed. One message. Kay, that cabin, we'll build it facing west, just like you said. She smiled. Typed back. Kala, somewhere the light knows how to find us. A week later, Kala walked into the old community center on the south side of the city. She had been invited to speak on behalf of Reseed, not at a boardroom, not a gala, but at a community circle organized by a group of retired black farmers and youth educators. No press, no cameras, just folding chairs and decades of wisdom. The woman who led the meeting, Miss Eloise, hugged Kala before she even sat. I've been watching you, child, she said. You speak like someone who's lived through the soil herself. Kala smiled. My granddad used to say, you don't own land, you borrow it from your grandchildren. That earned her nods. Real ones. Not polite. Earned. As she spoke, she realized how far she'd come, not just geographically but internally. This wasn't the version of her who tried to blend into conference halls. This was the version that could hold a mic without apology. I know we don't always get invited to the big rooms, she said, but let me be clear, those rooms are not more sacred than this one. After the meeting, a young girl about 15 approached her, hair in braids. Journal clutched to her chest. Miss Kala, she asked, how did you know this work was yours to do? Kala paused, crouched down slightly to meet her eyes. Because when I looked around and didn't see anyone doing it, I stopped waiting. The girl nodded, then hugged her. No words, just held her. And for a moment, Kala let herself feel the gravity of legacy, not as a pressure, but as a passing of light. She called Kyle later that night. Not for updates, not for planning, just to say something soft. When we were in that investor meeting, she said, you didn't look at me once while I spoke, but I felt your backing like armor. He was quiet for a second, then replied, because I wasn't there to approve you. I was there to reinforce what you already are. She sat down on her couch. That's the kind of man I didn't think existed. Kyle's voice came through warm. Well, he exists. And he's not running. They didn't rush things after that. Instead, they added rituals, late-night calls, morning coffees at the same cafe, text messages that weren't about work, and slowly the layers between them peeled back. Calla learned that Kyle's father had walked out when he was 9, that he'd built most of his values through opposite modeling. If my father was proud of how ruthless he was, Kyle once said, then I figured the real strength must be the opposite, restraint. Calla told him that her biggest fear wasn't failure. It was erasure, that someone would take her ideas, her tone, her intention, and scrub her out of the picture. Kyle looked at her, held her hand, and said, "You'll never be erased where I stand." 2 weeks later, they drove out to the cabin site, this time with tools. They stood at the edge of the open plot, surrounded by untouched wild grass and a breeze that moved like whispers. He handed her a small stake flag. "You pick where it'll stand." Calla walked forward, paused, turned slightly west, right where the light fell longest. She pushed the flag into the ground. Kyle came up behind her, arms wrapping her waist. "You just marked the heart of it." She leaned into him. "Let's build it slowly. No other way." Back in the city, the partnership documents finalized. Calla's name now appeared next to Kyle's in the executive listings. Some eyebrows rose, but no one questioned it twice because her results spoke louder than rumors. Still, she noticed the shifts. Former colleagues calling her more often. People who once ignored her, now looping her in. And some still trying to bait her into proving herself. But she didn't bite. She didn't need to. One afternoon, while reviewing land viability data, Kyle walked into her office. He held an envelope. Neutral expression. "What's that?" she asked. "It came for you." She took it, opened it. It was a handwritten letter from Miriam. Her former boss, the woman who had demoted her, silenced her. "Calla," it read, "I watched your investor presentation. I realize now that I clipped wings I was afraid to see fly. I'm sorry. I truly am. If you're willing, I'd love to reconnect. Maybe even collaborate. No apology for the past could erase the hurt." But Calla folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, didn't throw it out, didn't frame it either. She looked at Kyle. "I don't need her validation, but that letter, it proves I didn't imagine it." Kyle nodded. "It happened. And you rose anyway." That night, they sat on her rooftop again. Blanket, wine, quiet hum of the city below. Kyle looked over and said, "You know, I used to think that building empires was the goal. And now I think peace is the real wealth. Everything else should serve that." She leaned into his shoulder. "You're not the man I thought you were when I first met you. Good or bad? Better." He kissed her forehead. Soft, still, present. Later, before leaving, he stopped at her door. "Calla," he said, "I know we've been careful, but I need you to hear something." She turned to face him. "I don't want this to stay temporary or casual. I want to grow with you. Whatever pace, whatever shape it takes." She didn't flinch, didn't deflect. She just stepped forward, reached for his hand and said, "Then don't ask me to be smaller than I am. Ever." His answer was instant. "I won't ever." And that night, when she closed the door behind him, she didn't feel uncertainty. She felt anchoring. The soft rustle of papers filled the boardroom as Calla stepped inside. This time, she didn't wait outside the glass doors, didn't hesitate at the threshold. She walked in like she owned time. The quarterly strategy meeting had been rescheduled twice, once because of travel. Delays, once because one of the lead partners insisted on a different venue, but today, the room was full. Executives from investment circles, agricultural specialists, journalists invited for a post-conference panel, even 2 senators in tailored blazers. Calla didn't blink. She wore navy. Clean lines, no apologies. Kyle sat to her left. He didn't introduce her. He didn't need to, because the opening slide of the presentation behind him already read, "Calla Miles, co-founder. Reseed Partnerships, not a guest, not a consultant, not a +1. She stood, clicked the remote, and started. Good morning. I'm not here to rehash what you already know about food equity. You've heard stats, you've seen reports, but have you felt the weight of a mother watching her neighborhood store pull fresh produce off its shelves? The room stilled. Calla didn't raise her voice, but the gravity in her tone did the lifting. I come from those zip codes, not conceptually. Personally, she walked the length of the room once. My uncle had to drive 40 to 5 minutes for oranges. I watched kids eat chips for breakfast because dairy expired too fast in their homes. A senator leaned forward. But we didn't come to just talk about problems. She clicked again. Slide changed. Here's what we've done. She laid out Reseed's impact in numbers. 12 neighborhoods with pilot vertical farms, 40% drop in produce transportation. Costs over 700 local hires profits, redirected into educational community shares. And then came the final slide. Here's what's next. She didn't sugarcoat the ask. $15 million for urban farm expansions, not for vanity projects, but for permanent roots. No flashy metaphors. No filler. When she finished, the room didn't clap immediately. They paused. Processing. Then Kyle stood. This is what reinvestment looks like. Not handouts, not guilt-led funding, but ROI backed by dignity. The clap started with one woman in the back row, then another, until the room echoed with real approval. After the session, Kyle caught up with her in the hallway. He didn't say, "You were amazing." He said, "You made silence a privilege." Calla exhaled, not relief, release. That evening, she returned home to a letter slid under her door. No stamp, no envelope, just her name, handwritten. She picked it up, unfolded it, and read, "You were never meant to be one of them, Calla. You were meant to surpass them. This is your fire. Burn wisely." No signature, but she knew the handwriting. Her late grandfather. She had kept old notes he once wrote on recipe cards, and somehow someone had transcribed his voice into her present. She didn't cry. She smiled, folded it, and placed it inside her journal next to a photo of them in the garden, muddy hands and all. 3 days later, she visited the first Reseed farm. South Side. Concrete lot turned living harvest. Kids ran between raised beds of kale and tomatoes. Volunteers logged water systems on tablets. Elders sat under a canopy teaching teens about soil nutrients. It was loud in the best way, and in the middle of it, Kyle walked up behind her. "You picked a good flag spot," he said. She turned, smirking. "I learned from the best." He took her hand. In front of everyone. No hesitation. Calla looked up at him. "Do you still think silence is power?" He shook his head. "No, not anymore." "Then what is?" Kyle leaned close, witnessing, showing up when it matters, and saying the truth out loud. She leaned into him. "I'm ready." "For what?" "To stop calling this a project, and start calling it a life." He didn't respond with words. He kissed her forehead in front of all their staff. A statement, not performance, not pageantry, just a man finally brave enough to be seen beside a woman who rose without waiting. The farm's rooftop overlooked half the city. Raised beds lined the space like a quilt of green and earth, and from the top, the sun didn't glare. It wrapped around you. Calla stood by the railing, arms folded loosely, letting the hum of laughter below drift up to her. She didn't feel tired. She felt ready. Kyle joined her with 2 mugs, one for her, light oat milk, no sugar. He remembered. He handed it to her without a word, just presence. "I used to think legacy came from structures," he said softly. "Buildings, companies, long resumes." Calla tilted her head, waiting. Kyle looked down at the bustling farm below. "But I was wrong. Legacy is when people's lives are different, better, because you stayed instead of ran." Calla turned to him. "So, you're staying?" "I already did. And I'm not leaving again." She leaned her back against the railing. "I wasn't sure, you know. if this would work. Not just the project. Us. I was the one who didn't deserve to be sure, he replied. You never stopped showing up. The breeze moved gently between them. He reached into his jacket pocket. Calla narrowed her eyes. Kyle. He pulled out a ring. Simple band. No stone. No camera. No audience. Just truth. I bought this the day after I signed those divorce papers, he admitted. Not to fix what I broke, but to start again, with consent, not control. Calla blinked slowly. You knew I'd walk away. Yes, but I didn't know if I'd have the courage to walk back. You gave me that. He knelt. No speech, no promises, just one question. Will you walk forward with me now? Calla looked at him, at the man who once folded under pressure, then rebuilt brick by brick beside her. She didn't smile right away. She breathed. She searched his eyes. And nodded. Yes. Not because you asked, but because I already decided. Their second wedding was small. A rented community garden. Fold-out chairs. Neighbors, elders, 2 stubborn teenagers who'd volunteered since day one. A flower girl who was once a shy kid Calla tutored on weekends. No string quartet, just laughter and good food, and 2 vows spoken with steady voices. Kyle didn't say, I'll never hurt you again. He said, I'll never leave questions unanswered again. Calla didn't say, I forgive you. She said, I see who you are now. And I like her too. They kissed, no music, just whined through sunflowers. Months passed. Their joint venture doubled in scale. Calla began mentoring girls through a leadership series called Rooted Women. Kyle funded the rebuild of the shelter where she once volunteered. The house his ex-mistress claimed, Calla sold it. The funds rebuilt the corner library her neighborhood lost 5 years ago. One evening, while closing up after a farm dinner, Calla wrote a note on the whiteboard wall inside the volunteer shed. It read, You may lose the home you built for someone else. But when you build one for your purpose, no one can evict you. Moral lessons. If this story spoke to something inside you, whether pain, love, or quiet strength, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment. What would you have done in Calla's place? Share it with someone who needs to know that walking away doesn't mean giving up. It means honoring your worth. And if you want more stories like this one, stories where truth wins quietly and love returns on earned terms, subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories. We don't just tell stories. We tell lessons that live inside you.